Maryland, Michigan, Nebraska, New York, Nigeria, Oklahoma, Ohio, even Ohio. Yay! South Africa, Spain, Virginia, and good Washington, D.C. Yes, Wallace, and I'm sure others. So thank you. I mean, we don't realize how many people we touch and how many people really need us. So, you know, this is all a good benefit for those that need us. So whether you're here or on screen, I know you're on screen, so we just don't see you, but I know you're there. I'd like you to put in the chat so those of you on the screen can share with each other in the chat where exactly you're from. Give us your name and what brought you here. Share that with the community. So a special thank you really goes out to our incredible volunteers and staff, both on site and those behind the scenes, as I mentioned, who've already done a lot of work even to make today possible. So thank you for from the logistics and the staff. Thank you very much to those that have greeted our families here today and all the wonderful material that you have in front of you to help you take notes in this wonderful two-day or one-day event. So we are all grateful to have you here. If you're joining us for the first time, this is your first time joining us, or you've walked this journey with us before, we hope that today offers connection, learning, and encouragement. I hope you do find that this day. The workbooks in front of you lays out the agenda for today, so I'm not going to walk through the agenda, but you have it right in front of you, and we'll do our best to kind of follow that and get you 7 minutes back that we started 7 minutes late. So with that being said, there's coffee, as you guys have all found, but if you haven't, please go ahead and get yourself a cup of coffee or some juice or water so we can get the day started and get you guys excited. We have here with us today a table with materials from the PRRF. So during our break, feel free to walk back there and enjoy and just kind of peruse the material there. We have Barbara Shipman. Barbara, raise your hand. Barbara Shipman is from our local Clinton Township Library. It's a local community here in the area. And she has brought materials. They have a section specific to the blind. And I'll let, yes, no? Yeah, good. Okay. Barbara, I'm kind of following you thinking, yeah, am I saying this right? Okay. So, so feel free to walk through there and see what she has available, ask any questions, and she'll be there to kind of answer those. I also brought today a pair of Meta glasses. I apologize for those virtually, but we do have a pair of Meta glasses that as soon as we figure it out, and I think Alex, our pro, has figured it out, we're going to get to test them if you haven't already. But I know there's a few folks in the room who have them and work them, and very familiar with it. So with no further ado, what I'd like to do is introduce Stephanie. She's our PRRF manager and does a fabulous job and really helped bring this and put this together. Stephanie, give us an update on PRRF.
Louisa, we do have a couple reminders I want to share before we talk. So this meeting being recorded. So you're all being recorded. Hopefully you signed the release form when you checked in. If you didn't, please see Heather. If you don't want to be shown on the recording, let us know. We'll be putting it on YouTube and sharing it. So if you missed something and want to reference it later, we'll send an email after the event. All of our virtual attendees are on mute, but they can ask questions over the chat, and we're going to get through that with the Q&A and whatnot. So please be sure to submit those. And then will you go to my next slide? We do have a disclaimer, which is basically we're not giving you medical advice. So please don't hold us accountable. Everything we share here is, just meant for conversation and learning, and, take that piece of information with you. Okay, so PRRF. We have had a lot of really exciting things going on in the last year, some of which has been behind the scenes, and you may or may not have seen little bits and pieces of it or experienced it. So we just hired a new marketing person. We've had a marketing person for a very long time, but Annie joined us, and she is really focusing on our social media. And so hopefully you've noticed if you follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn, we've had a lot more robust posts and content and interaction. Hopefully you find the content exciting and engaging, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But we really are trying to boost up our efforts to connect with people with where they are. We're also bringing on a new person who's going to be helping us with our development and fundraising so we can raise some really crucial dollars to keep offering programs like this for free for people, to keep going the podcast at no cost to the people that are joining. And so we're excited to bring on some infrastructure and individuals that are going to help grow the foundation. Probably one of the more exciting updates is we are getting ready to launch a brand new website. So I was just talking with Sharon and Annette about this. It's really exciting because it's not just rebranding what we're looking like when you go to this site, but we're really putting a huge emphasis on being a place where people can go to find truly helpful resources. So whether you're a person living with disease, if you're a family member or caregiver, medical professionals, we're really building out all of these different components of our website because we want to be a resource for people who are along any point in their journey. So we're excited to launch that probably next month. We'll send an email to everyone and we want your feedback. Let us know if you're cited or not cited or partially cited. How does the website work for you? Is the content good? What else do we need? We really, really want to hear from everyone if this is meeting your needs. So that's been a labor of love for probably about the past 4 to 6 months. Just recently, we reinvested about $20,000 into the Oakland University Super Student Program. We've done that for several years now. That's a really great programming happening right here on the Oakland University campus. So students are going into the Pediatric Retinal Research Lab and other labs within the Eye Research Institute, and they're learning all about the research process. So they'll be working with doctors and mentors on different efforts to advance eye research, essentially. And they're exposed to what this looks like. So no matter where they go on their journey after Oakland University, they now have an opportunity to understand a little bit about research and look behind the curtain, if you will, to hopefully impact their either clinical practice or if they go into research or something, in a close area. And then I'm very excited because hot off the press, we haven't even announced it officially yet publicly, but we just invested $65,000 in pediatric retinal research. So we were awarding 5 pilot grants here at the Oakland University Research Retinal Lab. You'll get to see the lab in a little bit. Dr. Ken Minton is a wonderful host. He will take everybody around and explain the lab and how things work. But we're excited because we're investing in translational research. We've had a little bit of a focus on Keragen and what is happening with that most recently. And now we're reinvigorating some things at the actual scientific lab level. So with the pilot grants and translational research, for those who aren't familiar, the goal is not just to do research to understand the eye, but is to do research to understand how it can help patients. That's the translational part. So it's not just focusing on work we're doing in the lab, it's how do we get that into treatments to help people who actually need those particular advances. So that's what we focus on. That what makes us different and how we're excited to, make these investments. It's not just academic. So with that, we have the research side that we're really putting an effort on. And then on the community side, we're also continuing our podcast. So we have episodes being released twice a month. We have a whole slew of beautiful guests that are coming in and sharing all sorts of information from many walks of life. Louisa does a great job organizing that group with Bree, and we obviously will continue to do the conference. So we're trying to just really boost up all the things we're doing. So we're glad you're here. And we'd love to talk to each one of you if you want to learn more or see how you can get involved. We have a bunch of volunteer opportunities that are coming out too next month as well. So thank you very much. Next up, I will be introducing Dr. Drenser. She's going to give you a research update and talk about all of these great investments we're making.
that was a great introduction. It's teed me up well. So I'm Kim Drenser, for those of you who don't know me. I am one of the pediatric retina specialists with Matt and Dr. Capone. And I've also have a long history of doing research. And so one of the things that I've always maintained is the importance to be able to tie together unmet needs in patients' lives and how to address those from a kind of lab bench discovery phase and get that moving into meaningful treatments and management for actual patients. And we've done that. I think it's one of the things that makes the Pediatric Retinal Research Foundation really unique compared to other foundations, is that this is one of the only groups that really has a say in directing how the research goes. And as they were just talking about the new pilot research grants, I'll talk a little bit about that. Essentially, all discoveries have to go through what I would call a pilot project, where you have an idea or a thought and you say, I don't know where this is going to take me, but I just need a little bit of seed money and a little bit of dedicated time in order to understand this pathway and see if this can impact, my patients that I have to say, I don't have a good treatment for you, or we don't really understand why this is happening to you. So these are all the ways that we do it. And it always seems a little bit, I think, like a black box, because basically this is true basic science. You go into a lab and, with Dr. Mitten, you'll get a chance to see what the labs look like and what the research, kind of from the ground up looks like. But it's how every meaningful area of treatment for patients really starts and then develops. We're in a unique situation because we have kids with rare diseases, and it's sometimes very, very difficult to get the mainstream research organizations to be interested in something that's, poorly understood, fairly rare. It's a lot easier to do kind of the big mainstream topics. So being able to provide funding for these areas of research is really, really important, because that's what allows these researchers to take the risk of, maybe stepping a little bit outside of their specialty or outside of their area that they've been funded for and built a career, in being able to say, well, let me try this. And if it works out, I can actually turn this into a much bigger project. I can use this preliminary data to actually get a National Institute of Health funding big research grant. That's a little bit of what kind of started and how we got to the product of Norigen, which is a therapeutic for Norrie disease and familial exudative vitreoretinopathies and similar ischemic retinopathies. So that started off as just bench work, genetic testing, seeing if we could understand the pathway. And that led to being able to identify a key molecule, further study that molecule, and then design a therapeutic from that molecule. And where it stands now is that it is primed for manufacturing for clinical use. So the goal is to be in clinical trials within about 12 months with that drug. And that's kind of a quick review of how you go from one all the way through, but it has to start somewhere. So I was really, really happy that we were able to provide a lot more funding to these pilot research initiatives. They're not huge grants, but they're enough and meaningful enough to be able to ask a question, do the research, put together a report, and get together preliminary data to maybe have much bigger projects. They're not all going to be successful. And in fact, if they're all successful, we're probably being too cautious with the questions we're asking in research. So what we have is we have a bunch of different pilot studies looking at one of the things that's really, really problematic in a lot of eyes, whether you're talking about these rare pediatric diseases, but even in diabetic retinopathy, is scar formation. So whether we're talking about scar formation in the retina inside the eye or scar formation on the surface, on the cornea, we don't have good treatments to manage that. We, surgically go in and remove scar tissue, and we don't and have a good way to control it or stop it from coming back. So we have a couple of these pilot projects, which are really going to investigate not just understanding the fibrosis and the scarring, but can we actually reverse it or prevent it? And that would be really, really fantastic. So we've got a couple of projects on that. We're continuing to have novel ways to look at retinopathy of prematurity for anybody who's been affected by prematurity. It's evolved a lot over, the last 40 years. And now that we have new agents and anti-VEGF treatments that we can use in addition to lasers, we're seeing that what we still lack is the ability to actually regrow the retina or help it reach its full maturity. And so that's where these next projects are also looking at, is novel ways to look at prematurity as well. So the hope is that with, in about a 12-month period with these pilot grants, this time next year, we'll be able to have some data, we'll have some results, and we'll know which ones are going to turn into applications for much larger funding opportunities. And I think that where this is important for the community at PRRF is that a lot of times, I personally, and I know Dr. Capone and Dr. Trese spend a lot of time, with individual patients and parents talking about what's new, what's not new, and what we expect to see in the future. And sometimes it's really frustrating because you'll have to just have a conversation saying there's really nothing exciting right now. This field is not getting the attention it needs. And so this is one of the ways that we can actually work directly with our patients, our parents, our communities, and with researchers to try to put together and think about where's an unmet area of need, and is there a project we can do to address that and help develop it. So sake of time, I'm going to stop talking about research unless anybody has any questions before we move on. All right.
Oh, we have one here. Thank you, Dr. Drenser. So you can see here all of the things that are happening, and thanks to the physicians and the researchers that are working very hard for us. Next, what I'd like to do is invite Dr. Antonio Capone, actually, my son's middle name, Antonio. There we go. To come up, and we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, both for Dr. Capone and Dr. Drenser. Dr. Capone is a practicing pediatric retina specialist. He's been doing that for more than 30 years and a former managing partner of the Associated Retinal Consultants. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with Dr. Capone. We're going to allow some Q&A. Nicole is going to come up and resource the questions that have come in both online as well as those from the audience and those that submitted questions when they registered for the event. So participants that are remote, please put your questions in the chat for both Dr. Capone and Dr. Drenser. Anything research related or likewise, feel free to chat. And those of you here, if you'll use your little cue cards, or just we'll call you out and stand up and ask your question for them. Yeah, we do. So.
There's a copy of them right up there.
Oh, right there, right in front of me. Do you want us to read them out or?
Yeah. So this is,
Yeah, we can.
we'll have
Nicole will read them out.
Proctor.
Okay.
Yeah, copies for everyone. Thank you.
All right, is the hot seat ready?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll start and break these up into sections. So we're just going to start general questions that have come from the audience. Can you give us an update on gene therapy? I know you gave a little bit in your presentation.
Talk about it broadly in the field.
Yeah.
Not just in our lab. Please.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So, gene therapy, I think, is something that is always exciting and also always disappointing because it moves along as quickly as you think it will. The big breakthrough was with Luxturna, for treatment of Leber's congenital amaurosis. Very, very specific. Genetically, you had to, have the exact right type of genetic alteration in order to qualify. And I think it was really exciting to have something that was FDA approved and was efficacious and really opened the pathway for more funding and research into gene therapy. There have been a number of kind of starts and stops. It turns out, maybe not surprisingly, that not all genes can just easily be replaced with good outcomes. So a lot of rare diseases that looked very promising have faltered when they got into the clinical trial aspect early on with some safety issues. One of the ones that I find the most exciting, I think, is actually for X-linked retinoschisis. I think we're finally making some headway in that regard, and I'm very, very hopeful that we will see something that's going to be commercialized and available for patients in that area. That's my kind of brief take on.
So, I think maybe it may be useful to start at a high level to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page when we talk about gene therapy. So as Dr. Drenser mentioned, folks get very excited about the promise of gene therapy, right? The idea that the kind of nice sort of appealingly simple notion it's that a genetic defect can just be fixed, and then that everything after that is sort of perfect from here on in. And as Kim mentioned, one of the frustrations with that kind of work is it never progresses as quickly as we would like. And it's not the only area that's like that. I'm sure everybody remembers the kind of incredible energy around the topic of stem cell therapy in the beginning, and it was almost like every question that the folks posed, someone would counter with, "Well, can't we just use stem cells for that?" And it has some similarities. The problem is much more complex than it seems at first, and the notion of just open quote fixing with stem cells. I would draw the analogy with it's as if you had a problem with your car, and if the wrench is the stem cell, you could just fix the car by throwing the wrench at the car, and somehow would know where to go, what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and all that sort of thing. So all of these things are more complicated than they seem. So the appeal of gene therapies, and we're really kind of in that era in full now, is of fixing an underlying genetic abnormality and hoping that thereafter everything is good. To give you an idea of some of the limitations, though, is that genetic therapies are very, very highly focused. And we'll take almost any disease that you wish, and there are typically in that gene a number of mutations. And so a specific gene therapy won't necessarily always fix every gene variant that causes that disease. In fact, it's usually the other way around. So if, for example, for X disease, there are 100 different mutations that cause it, then gene therapy generally means 100 different focused genetic therapies to fix each specific abnormality. And each one takes many, many, many millions of dollars to bring to market. So I think you're seeing a little bit of the challenge, the headwinds that these approaches kind of carry with them. Gene therapy is indeed a very sort of appealing notion, fix the defect, but if every patient almost requires their own boutique fix, that's a challenge. And as Dr. Drenser mentioned, Luxturna is a treatment that, so first of all, the first human genetic therapy disease fix, not just for the eye, and wide acclaim and appeal. In work that had its roots actually here in Michigan. Really sort of very, very interesting in that regard, but it fixes a very specific mutation of a very specific disease. I know the RP65 mutation. So that's kind of from a high level. Going beyond that, Dr. Drenser mentioned the newer therapy for congenital X-linked retinoschisis. So one of the most common ways that these therapies are affected is that they're put into the envelope or the shell or the casing, if you will, of a virus that has had its own genetic material removed from it. And we just use that casing almost as a syringe, if you will, to inject the correct genetic material into cells. So it currently requires a surgical procedure. And that material is put into the cells and into the eye, and then the virus shell helps bring that into the cell, and then a certain percentage of those cells will correct, if you will. And right now, or up until recently, that cell had to be directly treated to have an effect. So why does that matter? If you wanted to treat cells in the center of vision, or if you want to have an impact in the center of vision, you had to directly infect the cells in the center of vision. And so that meant putting surgically that material right under the center of vision. So you are operating on the most valuable part of the eye from a vision perspective, right? The retina is like a dartboard in many regards, and the macula is the center of vision, is the bullseye. And so it'd be nice to be able to impact the center of vision without actually having to surgically manipulate it, right? It's just another element of complexity and risk that you bring to that. So it has its own issues, which we've found out in children who were treated often successfully, and then say 3 or 5 years down the line, you see some of the consequences of having had to work right on the center of vision. And those consequences aren't always positive, right? So again, you get a sense of the challenges, and not as simple as, you know, throwing the wrench against the car. One of the most exciting things about the new study that Dr. Drenser is speaking to is the term you'll hear if you look into it. The company's called Ansera, the one that's looking at congenital X-linked retinoschisis, and they talk about a virus shell that has been engineered so that it will spread laterally. And so the really important thing about that is you can get treatment to the center of vision without having to treat the center of vision directly, right? That's actually a pretty big deal. This treating the center of vision directly, particularly in children who have a hereditary retinal degeneration, the center of vision is even more delicate, if you will, by virtue of the genetic abnormality. And so now that you can impact the center, you know, if you can get to the 50-yard line by putting the treatment at the 20-yard line, that's a big deal. And so that treatment has shown promise through phase 2, and we'll probably spend like 30 seconds talking about the phases of trials just to make sure everybody's on the same page. But that's a fair way through in terms of the clinical trial gauntlet, if you will, and seems to be having positive results, and they're also including children patients as young as 6 years of age, which is another big deal, right? So to treat someone with a genetic abnormality and not treat them, say, until they're 21 or 30, a lot of times you're kind of late in the game because the best opportunity to impact is earlier on, as was also true for is also true for the Luxturna studies. So advances are being made. There are also other genetic techniques that are being brought to bear. We're getting more sophisticated with sort of with the approach for delivering, and there are some treatments that are we use the term sort of mutation agnostic, meaning they aren't dependent on fixing the single specific mutation, but they also don't give the most high quality vision, the broader approaches. They're more for a lower level of visual perception, sometimes light in people who didn't have light, you know, sort of thing, which is great. But it's not the level of vision that, you know, we would like to see. You know, we'd like to see folks get like really good vision back if we could. So I took a lot of airspace, Kim. I'm sure you have, you know, more that you can add to that, but I think it kind of frames how you look at it and how you think about it. It helps you when you see an article in the paper, understand what to make of it. It isn't as simple as just fix the defect, like change the part in the car and all of a sudden everything is going to work right.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that for people interested in tracking this, if you haven't done this before, it's a very easy site to use, is clinicaltrials.gov. And you can just put in, you can put the gene, you can put the eye disease, you could, you know, search it a bunch of different ways, and it will list any trials. And you can, you know, do a broad search. You can look at recruiting, not recruiting, closed, open. And so that's a nice way, because there are some other rare genes being looked at as well for some of the other dystrophies too. And so that's just a nice way to kind of look and see what's available out there. You know, there are also, I think this is what you were kind of alluding to, that a lot of the genetic therapies now, so the original genetic therapies were true gene replacements, where, and so to specify a good candidate would be, it's a dominant disease. So you, but it has, but one good copy is enough to be able to rescue the disease state. So it was very gene specific. You had to replace the entire gene, and a number of diseases don't work that way. Sometimes if you have one bad gene, that's enough to kind of muck up the machinery. There are newer techniques of what they call gene editing. And so that gets a lot of publicity, but it's very, very early stage right now. So there's a lot of hope that gene editing is going to make this a little bit less of a designer drug, where everything has to be so specified for each individual gene and each individual type of mutation, that we might be able to do something that's a little bit easier to manipulate, so that you are not having to reinvent the wheel every time you do a new gene therapy. So that's some of the stuff as well that that we have coming down the road.
Yep, so we took a fair amount of time on that one question, but I think it also sets the table for all the, should there be other genetic therapy questions that kind of frames the dialogue.
And actually, I guess one thing that might be good right now, just it's a little, it's a little bit more of a broad topic, but I think it can be very, very confusing. Most of these, because they are rare eye diseases, they don't follow the traditional phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trial design. A lot of times that's because obviously it's a rare disease. There are only so many people you can enroll in a trial. And so there's a lot of overlap. So oftentimes the phase 1/2 will actually, those same patients will actually roll into the phase 3. So one of the questions I get a lot is, you know, do I want to wait till it's a later phase, you know, when it's been more vetted? And the answer is not necessarily. If it's a good therapy that looks like it's a good candidate, you want to be in the early, because there's those early phases may actually end up being also the phase 3 patients down the road. So it doesn't follow that kind of stepwise course that we're used to in traditional medicines, because the FDA understands that you may only do 15 patients in a gene therapy to get to commercialization.
For rare diseases,
For
yeah.
rare diseases.
So real quick, you have a new drug, you think it might be effective, it comes out of the lab, and so how do you get to that, right? So phase 1 clinical trial is actually not so much interested in whether or not the drug works, is to make sure that the drug is safe. So safe, phase 1 is the first phase in humans to make sure that it's safe. Now, of course, everybody's interested to see if, well, great that it's safe. Did phase 1 show any effect, right? We call that signal, but phase 1 is a safety phase. You know, phase 2 is you're starting to determine, you know, what dose is going to be effective. So you might try it at a couple of different doses and see which one looks like it's the ballpark dose. Phase 3, you expand to a larger number of patients using the ballpark dose or doses, right? And then you would typically meet with FDA approval. And then we talk about phase 4, which is when that treatment gets in, open quote, into the wild, if you will, once it's actually being broadly used. Because a lot of these studies, as Dr. Drenser mentioned, for rare diseases might just be a couple dozen patients. For not rare diseases, might just be a couple thousand patients. And then the potential, you know, community of patients impacted might be hundreds of thousands. And so if a complication, for example, is rare and only happens 1 in 5,000 patients, you might not discover that during the clinical trial phases because not enough patients were included. And in phase 4, we're still studying the drug once it comes to market to see what happens when its application is broader. Back to you, Nicole.
Awesome. Before we go to the next question, just so everybody knows, there's cards at everybody's place. So if you have a question, just write it down and we'll ask up here. If you want to raise your hand, that works too. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Lizzie.
Yeah, are there any new developments in research with retinopathy of prematurity?
So there are a lot of areas that are being looked at for retinopathy of prematurity, and the majority of them now are not looking at, it's really what I would call more preventative. It's really trying to intervene before you develop retinopathy to stimulate the maturation and the growth of the retina to completely avoid the retinopathy that's associated with prematurity. And there are a lot of research protocols. They are all, in my opinion, still very much in discovery phase. I don't think we've seen anything that, and keep in mind that this is a very vulnerable population just by the nature of being premature. So there are other health risks. So the bar is very, very high in trying to get into a clinical trial for this, because we have to show, we have to be very, very certain that in growing the retina and helping it develop, that it doesn't have other unexpected side effects that affect, the health of the infant in general. But there's a lot of a huge variety of different research topics looking at how to stimulate that.
Lizzie, I'm gonna take the liberty to try to unpack what I think was the spirit of your question. So when folks ask about sort of what's new for treatment for ROP, it's really kind of two questions, if I may. One is the question that Dr. Drenser answered, and that is, what can we do to prevent or treat the early phases of retinopathy of prematurity? That's one question. I suspect that the other question is, what about what can we do for formerly premature adults who've sustained vision loss to help them see better? And I have a feeling that that was kind of more aligned with your question. Is like, for folks who are at your stage of life, what's going on in ROP research, if you will, to help people who had ROP when they were children of varying degrees of severity. And I have an answer for that. It's a little bit more general. The challenges for that treatment are related to, I won't take 15 minutes to answer, I promise to go. To the development of vision being based on more than just the eye. We all think about the eye as, critical to vision, which of course it is, but it's only part of the visual system. It's a third of the visual system. If you think about the visual system a lot like a satellite dish, cable, and TV setup, the eye is the satellite dish. And then the satellite dish communicates with the TV set, which in this case is the brain, via a cable, which transmits the information. And then that information that the eye captured at the level of the brain is turned into vision. When vision is impacted in infancy, when people are infants, then yes, the eye is affected. That's where ROP happens. But the rest of the visual system continues to develop in the first 9 years of life, right? So when the amount of information reaching the brain is reduced, let's say, to whatever degree that it is in infancy, then the brain doesn't develop the visual centers quite as fully as it would have if it had a normal amount of input getting to it, right? So there's that issue, right? Then where do you work if you're going to work on a technology to help bring vision to people who have reduced vision from a disease that happened in infancy? And that's usually at the brain level. It's not working on the retina, it's not working on the optic nerve, it's working at the brain level. So again, kind of, let's set what are the guardrails, for the problem. So that's the problem. And now that's a problem that doesn't just affect people with retinopathy of prematurity. It affects it impacts almost anybody with a condition that reduced their vision from infancy, right? Because largely it's going to end up, that was a profound vision loss. So largely it's going to be, how do you work where the retina was damaged? You're going to be working with the brain. So there are a number of therapies that are under development. They are fairly high tech. People hear about things like the microchips, and there are microchips that have been developed not just for the retina, but also for the visual part of the brain. In the news more recently is the Neuralink is one of the Elon, Musk invested in initiatives that has to do with really, I would call it an engineering approach to bringing vision to people who are not sighted because of problems with the eye, by working at the brain level. So there is working on, now I'm going to finally answer the question. There is a lot of work going on in that area. It's a very technically complex issue from the engineering perspective. It's also a biologically complex issue. And I will say that naysayers, people who are sort of against the approach or like don't believe the approach is really going to work, will say, well, if there never was much in the way of brain development, then you're not going to get water out of a stone, right? How are you going to, how do you hope that you're going to get vision? And time again, I will tell you, I now have the perspective of someone who's been in the business for decades. There are many times that I can cite that there were things that we thought were going to be so, for example, that this was going to be true because all the science that we knew up until then informed that perspective, that we found it actually was not that way, right? And indeed, when someone, had an approach that kind of went against the grain and tried it, it actually ended up working, right? So that's where we are right now, okay? Long answer to your short question. Matt's question. Kim, do you want to take it?
Sure. So I'll start off with what I think is the easier question, which is just, how do I guide people through making decisions about clinical trials? And I think it really comes down to risk of the trial and risk of progression of their disease. I think that there's no like complete right or wrong answer, and it's individual too. We know this from patients, even when you're just talking about macular degeneration, people have varying degrees of tolerance for risk versus benefit. So I will, if I think that if I think the trial is just not a good fit, I won't spend a ton of time talking about it because I'll just say, here's 3 reasons why I don't think this is something, let's wait till there's something better. But if I do think that they're a good candidate, I'll go pretty detailed through the trial, what the risks are and why I think that they're a good candidate for it. But to me, it really has to do with, what's their vision status at the time? And what do I expect it to be 10 years down the road? Do they have a 10-year window to wait for something better? Or is this going to be a rapidly changing scenario where they could do well today, but in 3 years not be doing well? So I think it's really that. And it means that some of these trials, even if I like the technology, are very hard to recruit for, because I can't justify, I'll take an example of what I think is just a poorly designed trial. Was the original retinoschisis trial, which was an intravitreal injection for people with good vision, right? They had the most mild, the most mild stage of disease. So they have good vision. They're the least likely to develop poor vision. And it's a very risky trial. Especially with that technology, because there's some newer genetic manipulations in the viral vectors, which I'm still a little bit reluctant to say will definitively allow for intravitreal injections. The risk for having a immune response to a vitriol rather than putting it under the retina. So Dr. Capone was talking about these mostly being surgical, and they're surgical because you actually have to go under the retina and put the viral vector in the subretinal space. So it's adjacent to the cells. And that's for 2 reasons. One, these viruses are good vectors because they're not real pathogenic. They don't cause a lot of disease, which also means that they don't infect cells very well. So the very nature that makes them safe makes them not great at transducing the material into the cells. So you really have to put them right where they need to be in order to infect the cells. Now, there's newer technologies which are allowing it to be more effective and have this spreading and lateral spread of infection, which is great from a spreading material to translate into a therapy. But it's still not clear that putting it in the vitreous is not going to have issues with having an immune response where your eye says, wait a minute, that's a foreign object, that's a virus in my eye, and attacks it. And that has some problems too. So I think that, sometimes there are, like, I'm excited about the idea that there's research and clinical trials, but I don't like the trial and I think the risk isn't worth it. So, I guess I put my opinion as to the quality of the trial. And maybe it's a little bit patriarchal, but I think that when you're talking about things that are, from a bioengineering standpoint, very, very technical and can potentially be very high risk, it's not necessarily fair to expect someone to try to do all their research themselves to understand the risks. And, going back to the stem cells, stem cells were a very unproven therapy. And in, it was actually Arizona. I know Florida and Arizona had these stem cell clinics. And I actually had a patient with ROP who had end stage disease. And he was a young adult and very frustrated with not being able to see. And he actually ended up going from low vision to blind, painful eyes because he got these injections in Arizona. So I think that it's a very long-winded answer for you. Our job to parse through not just, the technology, but also the appropriateness of the way that the study was designed.
Yeah, so, and Matt, that hit on an important point that I think a lot of folks aren't aware of, that you can't do, if you wanted, even if you're inclined, you can't be engaged in 5 different clinical trials, right? Once you're in a clinical trial, it's often an exclusion for going to another clinical trial. So the impact of that just kind of amplifies what Dr. Drenser is saying, is really kind of want to pick your shot, and because you just generally will get one shot, and it'll preclude you from becoming involved in another. So between picking which eye, right, and then picking which trial, it's there's a lot of head scratching in terms of what study to get involved in and when. Back to you, Nicole.
Can we do a lightning round?
Sure. Either yes or no questions.
I know, Dr. Drenser, you spoke about if you're interested in research for a specific disorder to go to clinicaltrials.gov. For the patients that are in the community where their primary eye doctor is not involved in research, but they find something that might fit them, can you help kind of navigate this? How can we align
Yep.
the patient to what they're finding?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things, so on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see it'll always have the participating sites. And some of those make it very, very difficult to participate. Sometimes there's one site and what are the odds, but they will have contact information. So oftentimes the best thing to do is, if you find something that, that you're interested in and you don't have a provider, or your provider says, well, I'm not really sure, I don't know, this isn't really my area. There's a contact person in that, and they can oftentimes direct you to somebody who's a specialist that can do the evaluation to see if it's a reasonable trial or not, because it is a very common problem.
So as a patient who's exploring this, should we be afraid of hurting the feelings of our doctor that we see all the time because we're exploring
No,
research?
I don't think so. I think that, I think it's a great tool, and, even the best provider isn't constantly scouring clinicaltrials.gov for every single patient. So, I've, I go through it fairly regularly, and I'll occasionally have a patient with a very, very rare mutation who will have found it and I missed it. And, I'm happy to review that trial with them and see if it's something that's reasonable. And sometimes I'll send out an email to the contact person and forward their information. So, if you have a provider that has hurt feelings, that's probably a red flag.
Get a new
Get a
provider.
new
Yeah,
provider.
because it's not about the doctor, it's
Yeah.
about you. So I'm going to put a point on that. That's the question I think you're asking,
Yeah.
right? It's not about the doctor's feelings. If they're there to serve you. And so if the doctor has a problem with you asking that kind of question, find a new doctor.
Yeah.
Awesome. So our lightning round, we're going to break down into disease states. So we'll do a couple for each disease. So let's start with fever. And question 1 is, how effective is Macugen in treating fever?
Okay. So I do not find, not just Macugen, but I do not find the anti-VEGF drugs. I find them somewhat helpful with fever, but not terribly helpful, especially with repeated dosing. I will use an anti-VEGF to control some acute exudation or vascular leakage, but I have not found that repeated treatments with it has been helpful. I also find it helpful if they get a very bad type of glaucoma, like vessels that grow on the iris and they can bleed, they can cause neovascular glaucoma. I find it helpful if we're controlling that aspect. But truthfully, most fever needs to be managed with laser surgery, it being really diligent with those techniques.
Nothing to add.
Okay, next question. What complications have you seen in children with laser treatment in regards to pupil size, specifically in fever? Example, have you seen delayed dilation of the pupil after they receive laser treatment?
Yeah, so actually the question is that not specific to fever. The problem, any problems that can arise as a consequence of laser are independent, generally independent of the disease. And the main ones and they're all rare. So if someone needs laser, the risk benefit calculus overwhelmingly weighs in favor of treatment. So I think, again, that's part of the spirit of the question. So things that can go wrong when you get a laser, rarely you can get laser cataract as a consequence of laser going from front to back, super rare, but been reported. And with any kind of laser, doesn't matter. We have different wavelengths and it can happen with any of the wavelengths that we use. Another thing is that to the point of the question, it can affect the dilation of the pupil. The nerve that is responsible for regulating the pupil diameter response to light runs underneath the retina at sort of at 3 and 9 o'clock. And so if you're lasering densely to control the fever or ROP or other diseases, you can, damage that nerve that sits underneath. And so it can impact how the pupil works. Generally, it does not constrict as well as it otherwise normally would. At a third one, those are the two main ones. Oh, yeah, and sometimes if you happen, you can also, the iris can stick to the lens a little bit after laser. You can get an inflammatory response after laser sometimes, and you can get a little bit of adhesion or stickiness of the iris to the lens. But those are all relatively uncommon. I'm not diminishing them if they happen to you. It's 100% right if it happens to you. But the threat of the disease is far, far greater than the threat from the therapy.
And also, you can have diminished iris, pupillary dilation and constriction just from having very ischemic retina.
Yeah.
So it's not exclusive to laser treatment. You could still have a poorly reactive pupil just from having a lot of neurodegeneration of the retina itself.
So, over the course of, my career, have I seen that in fever issues, like the ones I've mentioned in fever patients? Yes, but also in patients with retinopathy of prematurity and patients with another rare disease known as incontinentia pigmenti and other conditions. It's the laser complications are a bit disease agnostic. They're more generalized.
Great. One more for fever.
Mhm.
What's the best advice you can give to parents when a specific gene is not identified in fever?
Well, I would I'm going to answer with a question: in what regard? And here's why I say that. The specific mutation is informative because there are some mutations associated that cause fever that have other disease associations. For example, osteoporosis, pseudoglioma syndrome, OPPG. Those children will often have skeletal issues as well and growth issues and other things. So if it's positive, it's informative. But if it's negative, it doesn't impact on how you're going to treat the fever. You're going to treat the ocular findings are going to be treated the same way no matter what the genetics are. The other challenge, if you don't get, and so by way of background, this is what drives that question. Only 50% of patients who have clearly got fever based on their exam will give you a genetic result that's a positive hit, right? So half of them, they have it, a parent will have it, a sibling will have it. We just haven't learned the gene or genes that are causing it for them. And so that's the second impact of not having a positive genetic hit is it's hard to do genetic counseling without a, genetic result that is like specific. But in terms of disease management, doesn't really change anything.
Great. I have a good question for ROP, switching gears. Is there any new research on retinal transplantation for children that are born with grade 4, grade 5 retinopathy of prematurity?
Short answer is no.
Okay. All right. Now we have a bunch of questions from online. Yeah. If anybody has questions on their cards, just hold them up in the air and we'll collect them. So Dr. Drenser, this one's for you. For the Norigin therapy clinical trials, how can we register to see if we're a candidate to participate?
So it's not available yet. A US requirement is that all US clinical trials are in clinicaltrials.gov. So it's not even uploaded at this point because we are still in the manufacturing period. So again, going back to that one resource, if your provider doesn't know.
Okay. How about, what's the latest update in technology for treating retinal detachment that's associated with persistent fetal vasculature syndrome? And do you think gene therapy will help?
I don't think there's really anything new with regard to surgical approaches. That we still apply the same, technology and approaches to surgical management of PFBS that we have in the last decade or so. And the second part of the question again?
Gene therapy, yeah.
Do you think gene therapy would help?
No, so rarely PFBS is misdiagnosed and it is a genetic disease, but that's usually when it's a very asymmetric case of fever is the most common. And so that may down the road have some genetic therapy, but generally speaking, true PFBS does not have a genetic link.
I love keeping you on your toes, so let's switch back. We'll go back to fever. Have you noticed that there is some kind of link between when a child with fever goes through growth spurts and then progression of their worsening vision?
Good.
Yeah, so it's not universal, but definitely when children are going, are prepubescent and going through puberty and there are changes in their hormones, you can see exacerbations. And it kind of makes sense because a lot of these growth hormones are very, very similar to some of the factors that drive retinopathy to begin with. So you can see an exacerbation of disease. So I usually tell, and I think everybody's a little bit different, but I usually tell parents, because parents get tired, having so many exams and having to bring their kids in, that, a young child doesn't lie, they just suppress their poor vision. So they're not trying to mislead you that they're having a worsening of disease. They just honestly don't know it. Their brain just suppresses it. So they need to have, pretty regular examinations. And that a prepubescent and a child going through puberty actually will actively lie because they now hate the doctor. They don't want to see you. They don't want to get all their tests done. And they're at the highest risk for having a progression. So even though they might be really surly about having to come in, you kind of do have to force them to come in during that time period. Once you get past that, young adults actually do care about their vision. And then I find that they're much more reasonable patients and don't lie about their vision changes. They're concerned about their vision.
Yeah, we like a lot of, to expand on what Kim is saying, we like a lot of pediatric retina specialists will put kids on a systematic visit schedule. And folks will commonly say, again, because of visit fatigue, they'll say, well, can't we just come in if there's a problem? And it's just to me analogous to, do you, wait for your car to break down to address the problem with the oil, or do you, prevent it? Because when we will often be able to see a problem as it is evolving when it is at a stage where we can get in and fix it relatively simply, or you can come in when, it's kind of a quagmire and now it's a big Rambo, go in and rescue it, sort of thing. So we'd rather see a child often enough to do small, nuanced, things that will have a big preventive impact instead of getting in, when it's
End stage.
end stage and kind of catastrophic and trying to rescue, process that has a big head of steam.
There was a follow-up question, which I think you addressed is, a child has stage 1 in one eye, stage 4B in another eye, and how do you check it? So this short leash that you keep kids on for a little while is the way to keep this under control.
Yeah, our standard, even when kids are stable, is usually 6-month treatments and depending on the severity of the disease, but also usually or often getting angiograms on a regular basis, which is the dye test where they put the dye in the veins. And so that's generally the status quo.
Okay, I have 2 different questions, but I think going the similar route. So first one is it normal for a child with fever to close one eye to stabilize the stronger eye? And have you heard of patching the better eye for abnormal, advanced ROP to try and strengthen that weaker eye?
Yeah, sure. Do you want?
I'll just give you, I think everybody has different answers on this.
Yeah.
If a child or a patient is closing the worse eye to try to see, oftentimes it tells you that they actually have enough vision in that eye that the brain is trying to superimpose the 2 images and it's causing some confusion. So it kind of leads to that second question. I actually do encourage them to patch the better eye in those situations because if they're not seeing anything well out of that eye, they don't need to close it because their brain has completely shut it down. But if they're closing their eye to use their better eye, that tells you that there's usable vision in that eye.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, one of the issues that comes up with patching, when one eye is fairly advanced, the other eye, is actually pretty good. That's different about this collection of patients than say the standard kid with crossed eyes in the, pediatric ophthalmologist's office is. But patching is kind of easiest, most rigorously applied and works best when an eye actually sees well. It's crossed, but it sees fairly well because then you patch it to try to bring it to normalcy, right? And the notion is you patch the good one so that way the brain will invest in the one that isn't as good and therefore make it stronger, and then bring it to parity or to, So if a child has a severe detachment, even if it's repaired in one eye, you can't possibly patch the good eye enough to bring that eye all the way back to normal. We still will do some patching, sometimes for an hour a day, maybe only, just so that way the brain doesn't shut it off entirely.
Right.
Because the brain's a very stingy investor. If it has one eye that's really good, it's going to put all of its investment in that eye. So you have to, by patching that eye, convince the brain, open quote, that some investment needs to go into the other eye. So you want to get at least some degree of development in the poorer eye, but you don't want to patch so much that you hobble the good eye. And there's art to that.
And also too, for anybody who's struggling with this, I have a great trick, which all of my parents love. So whatever that child's favorite video game, favorite cartoon, whatever it is, that's their reward.
Yep.
Patch the good eye and you can play this as long as you want. And it's actually, be amazed. You can really see if they like that game or that cartoon enough, they'll put the patch on themselves to get the.
Parents will often ask, what kind of activity is
Yeah.
best to, if I patch my child's, better eye.
Whatever they like to do.
And I'm like, in terms of visual development, Scooby-Doo and Shakespeare have equal value.
How about looking at activities? So activities like tumbling and trampoline classes, are they okay for kids that have ROP?
Well, so again, kind of two questions. One is it okay for the eye, right? And then the other is like, okay for the kid, right? So, for a child who has stable ROP, they had ROP in its active phase and now they're in the scarring phase, and it's quiet and they're, 15, probably not going to hurt the eye by using a trampoline. However, you have lousy depth perception, when you're in that instance. And so you won't necessarily hurt the eye, but the child may not fare as well. So I'm not a trampoline fan. for anybody who's not got depth perception, but in general for the pediatric retinal diseases, I'm not a trampoline fan. You know, I'm much more forgiving for things like roller coaster rides, because it's typically not direct trauma to the eye. But I think trampolining is personally, I think it's a bad idea. Lots of other things to do in life besides trampolining.
Agree. Is it normal for someone with no vision out of one eye, specifically in fever, to have persistently different sized pupils?
It's common. So the action of the pupils is actually, you know, controlled centrally. So typically, if you shine a light in one eye, both pupils will, you know, constrict in response to that. So for the pupil, you know, to be fixed or not moved, generally it's got to be scarred in position. And that is not uncommon for the more advanced stages of not just fever, also, you know, ROP, persistent fetal vasculature, Norrie disease, et cetera. So for any scarring disease of the eye where the pupil can get, you know, stuck, a difference in pupil size is common.
Dr. Drenser, this is for you again. One question about Norwegian trials, would they be in the US?
Yes.
And if you live outside the US, what are your options for participating in trials like that?
Well, there will likely also be international trials.
Okay,
Usually they're in multiple countries.
awesome.
Yeah.
I love this next question. With all that we talk about, we're always talking about the bad things that are happening. So in the spirit of positivity, for families that are going through any of the eye disorders, what are the small wins that we should celebrate for the kids? And how do you keep people focused on the positive with all that they have going on with the negative consequences of the disorders? Don't fight over this one.
Well, no, it's a great question, and I think there isn't obviously a universal answer. I will just give a story from my daughter, my oldest daughter, who always has a very different perspective on almost every topic in life, and says it very meaningfully and thoughtfully, and oftentimes changes my mind. And so when she was very, very young, she was about 6 years old, and she was playing in her room, and she was always fascinated about what I do. And so I was talking to her about, you know, having, you know, a day in the OR and, you know, these kids and what we were dealing with. And she goes, but can they hear? And I go, yeah, those kids could hear fine. She goes, well, then that's better. If I had to lose something, I'd rather be blind than deaf. And I looked at her like she was crazy, because obviously I'm an eye doctor.
Right.
And she said, no, honestly, listen to all the things that I get out of hearing. I can tell so much about my world. I don't need my eyes as much as I need my hearing. And so it just always changes my perspective. And I take that to a lot of parents and say, well, rather than focusing on what they can't do, or they, you know, just because you have normal sight, you see it as a devastating thing to them. But most kids don't view it that way. Most kids are very flexible, they adapt, and they strengthen other senses. And so I usually tell parents, I say, talk to them about what they like the most. What do they enjoy the most? What senses are the most, you know, do they like touch? Do they like smell? Do they like hearing? And it just, that story for my daughter really just changed my perspective on that. You know, we put a lot into losing a certain sensory, but kids don't necessarily. And I think sometimes we victimize them by making them feel like they have a deficit that they might not find to be as big of a deal as we all do.
If I could just sort of piggyback on that, I think that many times we focus on things that you can't do.
Yes.
And so the things that we should really be celebrating are the things that you can do. And I think that's, you know, part of what you were saying. And so, you know, some of the things that are really important, I think, are being able to live independently, being able to, you know, do the things that you need to do. You know, I hate putting it like this, but like achieving independence, activities of daily living, you know, having a community, making relationships, because individuals who have severe vision loss oftentimes are feeling very isolated with higher rates of depression, as we all know, and things like that. So building those communities are something that we should all celebrate, which is a lot of what today is about. So I think we should all celebrate that. From a medical side though, one small thing to remember is that if you're still seeing light, that connection between your eyeball and your brain is there still. And that leaves the potential for regenerative therapy available, right? You have multiple different ways that you can start thinking about how to improve things in the future. And as we all know, the science is getting better. Our ability to, and kids have a long life ahead of them. So I think those are all things to celebrate.
Well, and actually, I'll just add one quick thing to that, Matt, because I think this is really important and it kind of piggybacks on something Dr. Capone mentioned about, what we were taught and what we learned. So when I was a resident, and I'm sure you too, we were taught that if you never developed vision, it's impossible because that pathway didn't develop. And then second sight, which was the retinal chip, actually completely blew a hole in that entire dogma of thinking because it was such a huge surgery to put this, chip into somebody's eye and the implant and everything that the initial patients actually had to be completely no light perception. So completely blind, not just poor vision, completely blind. And many of those patients had never had any vision at all. So they had never been able to see a light from the day they were born. And when they put that implant in, they actually could see light and could see big images. So I think it's also important to keep in mind that you're talking about just one portion of your visual system that's not working well. And
And I'll piggyback on that as well. So usually if I have a flaw, it's not trying to find a way to make it positive. I probably am sort of irrepressibly, optimistic. And I think the challenge in that is, I'm not claiming that as any big virtue, is, you need to make sure you don't overpromise to parents, right? The second thing I would tell parents is that your child will think of themselves as you think of them. And so if you think of the visual challenge as just a little inconvenience, that's the way they're going to think of themselves. If you think of it as a large debilitating thing, that's the way they're going to think of themselves. And so it maybe sounds overly simplistic, but they will think of themselves as you think of them. The other thing is that even light perception is worth pursuing. In children who have only light perception, there are studies that have been done that if you deny in an infant, if you deny them light, for example, infants will strongly object. So furthermore, you can't, it's difficult to estimate what a child will make out of small amounts of vision as they grow, as compared to if we lost vision from where we are right now down to that level, because we still have neuroplasticity, the ability to adapt. But it's nowhere near close to the kind of neuroplasticity that a child has. So one of my favorite games to play with the fellows in the operating room is they'll examine a child and I'll ask them, how do you think that child sees? And then I will tell them how that child sees from, what the parents tell me. And time and again, the child sees at a level that, a trained ophthalmologist would not expect just from looking at the anatomy. And that speaks to what a child can do in terms of neuroplasticity. So I would add kind of, those are all sort of tidbits, philosophical tidbits acquired, throughout the years. And as Matt says, as long as there's light perception, then we may be able to do something from a regenerative perspective. And the hope is that even folks along the lines of what Kim is saying, I talked about phase 1 clinical trials, which are for safety, and then you look for signal. Imagine the researchers' response when they were doing the safety phase of the microchip and implanting it in people who were never supposed to see. We're going to put it in blind eyes, so that way if things go bad, well, it's a blind eye anyway. Wait a minute.
The one patient disappeared because since it was a safety trial, they were supposed to take the implant out after 6 months because they didn't know how safe it would be. And he said, no way. And he took off and they couldn't find him. He showed up when, I think it was 10 years later when the battery finally died.
So good question.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
Or maybe can we get a mic out
Oh,
here?
here, does this come off? Oh, you got one?
Having a child who was diagnosed with fever 38 years ago, this course that I've been on has been strictly, completely unknown. I mean, there was nothing. We called she was diagnosed by Dr. McDonald in Royal Oak, who referred us to this Dr. Michael Trese. Who that blah, blah, blah is Dr. Michael Trese. So I have family members and they're calling all over, and they call the Eye Institute in London. And London wanted to know if we knew of a place called Royal Oak, Michigan. And I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, I guess I'm not going to get to go to London. We were introduced, we met Dr. Trese. It's been a wonderful road. Visits, not so much way back then, but it's been a very interesting road. She has maintained sight in one eye with an experimental laser surgery that was done twice. Once when she was 4, I think was when he did the first one. And then he did a second one when she, I think was maybe 8 or 9. And we haven't had any since then. But in our household, there were never any excuses. She, couldn't say, well, I can't see that. And we always had the attitude, well, yeah, you can move your head, certain things. Games that we played with children with fever that have partially vision is you move your furniture around in your house when they're young and they're diagnosed, because it reteaches them to memorize and to learn. Okay, I like to move furniture. I didn't realize what I was doing until Dr. Trese told me. So it is very interesting, and I have sat in the waiting room for many years with parents, and they think, and they're absolutely devastated. They have this diagnosis of fever, and I'm like going, well, let me tell you, there's a wonderful world out there, either for children with low vision and high vision. It's your acceptance as a parent, which is very difficult, because you will, when they're diagnosed, go through what I call is an actual grieving period, because you have to have a new reality of raising a child with disabilities, which is something no parent is ever prepared for. It is a very rocky road, but there's a lot more supports out now than there was years ago. When she started school, they gave me this red handbook and said, don't ever lose this because you won't get through the public school education system without it. And it had all the rules. So, you just need to include your kids. There's baseball that they can play, there's soccer, there's swimming, there's dance, there's so many places. I called, I don't know, 22 dance studios because she wanted to take ballet. Well, I had to find somebody that wanted to work with her. I did. She danced with her for 25 years and made it all the way through and got her point shoes and managed, that type of thing. I think my biggest thing is being a parent with a child who has low vision or no vision or whatever is you have to put your emotions aside, and you actually have to just get on the road and go full force. And if your child cannot do it or does not want to do it, they will tell you. Okay. But my rule is, okay, you wanted to play soccer, but you don't like it because it's hard for you to follow the ball on the field, but you can't quit till the season's over. We won't go back, but you don't have, you can't quit. And it has a lot to do with that. And it also is, you know, you need to include them in anything and everything you can find. And you have to get rid of the stamina of walking into a birthday party with 35 kids running around from school and going into this panic that, oh my gosh, my kid's gonna get knocked over, or they're gonna get bumped into, or they're gonna spill something or drop something or whatever. All kids do that. Parents will accept it. It has nothing to do with their disability. You have to just push.
Thank you so much.
Yep,
Thanks for that.
that's great.
Great job. And we're at time, right? All right.
It's just, you know, it's hard sitting in the waiting room. Oh my gosh, they have fever, what do I do? I'm like, sign up for baseball. Oh, and I have done that.
What's next, Steph?
So lunch,
Okay.
best part of the day, right?
Mhm.
We do have some gluten-free options. I know some folks are gluten-free, so please take a look at the sandwiches back there and find the one that's appropriate for you. I know we have a chocolate allergy, so there should be some separated cookies for those who are not able to eat chocolate. We're gonna enjoy some. All right, everyone, I'm gonna go ahead and do our raffle drawing while you're eating your sandwiches, so please keep eating. I'll only be 2 minutes. I just want to thank everyone who purchased tickets. We offered a trip to Italy and we sold just over 100 tickets. Unfortunately, we didn't quite sell enough to hit our threshold to give away our trip. So if you look in your instructions and all of the pieces online, it will convert to a 50-50 raffle. So the unfortunate news is we didn't sell enough to hit our threshold, but the great news is that the prize is $2,700. So you could very well, perhaps still go to Italy. So we're going to go ahead and pull our winner today. We're going to give them a call on Monday and let them know they won and follow up unless you happen to be in the room. So David, can I have your help, please, to come up and pick our winner? These are all of our tickets here. We shuffled them up real good before putting them in here. I need you to stick your hand here and pick one winner for us, okay? All right, and it's on the other side. And our winner is Janet Goman, ticket number 57. So congratulations, Janet. David. Enjoy the rest of your lunch. Yeah, that's, just want to get everybody looking this way. I'd like to introduce Dr. Matthew Trese, who's going to be introducing our fireside chat. Dr. Trese is on our board and just a great person. It's my pleasure for sure to have met you. And I'll let you tell us a little bit about you. Go ahead.
First of all, so nice to meet all of you. Thank you very much for having me here today. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to participate in PRRF, and I'm also thrilled to be here on part of the Family Connection meeting. So I'm thrilled. I wasn't really prepared to say anything about myself because I was just given an introduction about two gentlemen whom I think really require, well, at least one of them requires no introduction, and then there's Dr. Capone. Just a joke, just a joke. So I'm very excited to introduce Wallace Stuckey, who I had a pleasure of speaking with today. And he was actually our keynote speaker a couple of years ago, and that's really where I kind of got to know him a little bit more. He is works for the U.S. House of Representatives in a capacity where he looks at accessibility for individuals' websites, and I'm sure much, much more, and hopefully we'll be learning more about that. But he has a history here with Associated Retinal Consultants and also the Pediatric Retinal Research Foundation for many, many years. I think he's been a patient of Dr. Capone's for maybe over 20 years, 25 years maybe. 25 years. So obviously a long relationship there. And over the course of that time, Wallace has successfully completed many significant milestones, many wins like we were kind of referencing earlier, not the least of which is high school, college, procuring a job, which as all of you know is a challenge if you're visually impaired or blind. And he's done it all very successfully. But I'm also able to tell you that Wallace has recently been accepted to grad school in London at King's College, which is very impressive. So I think we're all looking forward to learning a little bit more about that. And then there's Dr. Capone, who I think really does require no introduction. He is a friend and mentor, and obviously a passionate advocate for all of us here at PRRF and for all of our patients and those affected with pediatric retinal disease. So without further ado, I think I'll ask you guys to come up here for the fireside chat. Thank you.
It wouldn't be any other way. All right. I told. Okay. Sounds good. Are we good on the mic? Is this everyone's okay?
Testing 1, 2. Yeah.
There we go. I saw Dr. Capone yesterday, and I told him that at this part of the conversation, this is usually when he breaks out his trusty exam lights. Starts to look in my eyes. I don't know if you brought them today, but Dr. Capone was talking earlier about kind of being in this role for 30 years, and I've been around along for the ride for the past 25 of them. So it's been great all the way.
Why don't we talk about how we first met?
Absolutely. Well, a little bit. It goes back. I mean, I don't remember the first time I met Dr. Capone because I was a few months old. I have retinopathy of prematurity, and I think being born premature, your eye condition is something that is examined really closely because odds of complications are higher, and it was apparent that my retinas were having issues. What I have, it's bilateral partial retinal detachments, which means that the retinas in both of my eyes are partially detached, which dramatically affects your vision because the retina is what sends the light signal to the brain. And so Dr. Capone, my family was looking into, what do we do about this? Because it's, that really hits you. You don't expect, raising a baby is tough enough, but when you get a condition like that, I mean, it adds all sorts of other things you have to think about that you didn't think you were going to have to think about. And so they wanted to know, who was the best, who would be able to help, and found Dr. Capone here. And, we've just kind of gone from there. And so I first met Dr. Capone when I was a few months old, and he did an operation then, which has held up really, really well. Here we are 25 years down the road. And my vision has always been below average, and it was pretty stable, I think, until I was about kindergarten. And then it declined further. That's when I think, especially in class, that my teachers kind of noticed he's not able to keep up with some things, and he can read fine. It's not an issue with the comprehension, but I wasn't able to see things. I remember one specific thing that comes to mind is we had this when you came in, the way you recorded the roll was there was all of our names were on one side of the room, and they were on these magnetic strips, and you had to move them to the other side of the room to say that you were here, which I think they did to get you to learn how to spell and read and work on those skills. It's also a great way to not have to corral kindergartners. But it was taking me so long to be able to do that. And we said, my vision's declining further. So that's when we reached out to Dr. Capone again to keep seeing him regularly, and started to try to figure out all the other kind of services that, I was going to need. And it was a journey that we've kept up with to now. And for Dr. Capone, I think you said that their eyes continue to develop through 9 years or so. That seems pretty normal, doesn't it? Right? That there's a lot of visual change when you're young, 5 or 6 years old. Would you say that's the case?
Yeah, that's true. So the um, nerve network aspect of visual development continues until age 9, but the eyes continue changing in terms of the power of glasses and things like that until skeletal growth is done, and that's around 25 or 26. So you're finally there.
So you can still finally there. I mean, yeah, it's quite a journey, but um, that's seeing Dr. Capone and kind of moving and finding a path forward is when we start to think about what's the technology out there that I'm going to need and still need and use. And some of that you learn when you're, in the exam room with the doctor. There's some recommendations there because you use it at the office, but just in day-to-day life too. I started learning Braille when I was after kindergarten and through first grade, and I've kept up with it and used it in school, especially for math related subjects where you need to be able to feel, hard copy of what you're dealing with because it's complicated. And also one of my French classes I used a Braille physical copy all the way through. But so we have technology both in the classroom and in the exam room, and thinking about what you and Dr. Drenser were talking about this morning. Some of the technology is great and you want to keep it and use it, and some of that you also have to say no to, like some of the trials. And I've definitely noticed that in my kind of going through school too, that there's some things that work great and there's some things that don't. And I'd say on your side.
Well, walking in this morning, actually, we were even talking about Wallace for a while. Was that you were entertaining the sort of the leader dog, pathway, and even making the choice about who gets the leader dog, who doesn't get a leader dog, and why. So, if you don't mind, Wallace, because I think a lot of there are a lot of sort of decision points in your life that align with things that other folks in the room have gone through. If you don't mind, I'd like to kind of put some of those things in context. So Wallace was, if you don't mind my saying, Wallace was born in 1999. We met shortly thereafter, and took care of Wallace while I was in Atlanta before I came here to Michigan, and left Atlanta in 2000 in May. So actually, in a couple of weeks, it'll be 25 years since I've been here, and in the years since, I'd say kind of the journey with Wallace has been on two levels, right? Number one is the level of, kind of optimizing the eyes, right? Optimizing the anatomy, things like the glasses, patching, all that kind of stuff. But then also, again, paralleling the journey, I think for many of the folks in the room we're kind of the kind of care and feeding of the boy and now young man that was Wallace, going to school. What are the appropriate things that you need for school? How is elementary school different than high school, different than college in terms of the demands and the tools that you need to meet those things? So we each year we'd see each other and we'd kind of touch base on those things and negotiate those things together. One of the things that we've chatted about is the support system you have to help you along the way. And Wallace has had the good fortune of having an extraordinary support system. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. My family has been really important in my success in helping me find the right resources and making sure that I had the right team in place. So they're a big part of it, as is Dr. Capone and the other doctors that I see, and also the technology side. I've worked with assistive technology experts through the years, and also on the orientation and mobility side, learning the visual aids that I use. We did cane skills, crossing streets, all the kind of day-to-day tasks that are still, really important that you use for your whole life when you're navigating a retinal condition or any eye condition. And talking to Dr. Capone this morning, I mean, it really has made me think back to the past 25 years and how our time together has evolved. Because I came the most in elementary school and into middle school. And at that point, it was every, 4 months or so. And it was the full deal. It was the, getting put to sleep so you could do the in-depth examination of my eyes in the operating room. And there was a few procedures along the way. But now it's become, I like it more in the office when we can talk. That's a lot more fun trip to Detroit, I think. But we talk and you kind of help to steer the way forward and are a really important part of my support system. I think one of the key aspects of it is continuity and having this working with the same people through the years who help you to grow. And some of those folks are teachers of the visually impaired, which from first grade all the way through graduating high school, I worked with 3 of them who were all excellent, and they got to know well what I needed and in terms of the direct instruction in school, what things they needed to follow up with me on. So there's some things mostly reading based, like English and kind of history type subjects where I was mostly good on my own. They could provide the Braille version of what was going on in class, and I had that and I could follow along. But something like a math class, for example, there needed to be a lot of one-on-one time with them, because if you have math in Braille, it's entirely different than print-based math, like a fraction in print. It's vertical. In Braille, it's horizontal, and you need to work with somebody who knows how to teach you not only the material, but also how to instruct it to you in Braille, because that's something that the classroom teacher can't do. So that's one specific example of how having a support system and having somebody who's worked with you for a long time and knows your skill set and what you need most is really, really critical. And I'm always grateful for that. And, it helps me keep moving forward.
So for the audience, Wallace, do you mind telling them what your level of vision is?
Absolutely. I'll do my best to do that. And it can be tricky because, of course, we can measure vision on the eye chart, but one of the questions that you'll get if you are blind, have any level of visual impairment, is what can you see? And the answer is you can see what you can see, and you can't tell somebody what you can't see. And neither one of you in the interaction has much of a frame of reference to really understand what's what. I don't recall the exact number on the eye chart for my left eye, which is the stronger one. I have someone right here who might be able to give you
2400.
There we go. Phone a friend. But what that means is that I can see well enough with my left eye to navigate, to kind of see what steps are coming up, to avoid obstacles, and to identify where people are, but not that much about who the person is, or to tell a lot of features, maybe about them, and also something like signs, for example. With just my vision alone, I don't really pick up what those are saying.
How about reading?
Reading, I could do very large print if I wanted to, but I don't want to, because there's a difference in being able to do something and it being efficient and useful. So that's why I've used Braille and technology to navigate and to get done whatever tasks I need to do. And then the right eye it's mostly some light perception. I can see some motion change, and if I'm very, very close to something, I can see the outlines of it. But it's not. I don't really rely on that too much. And that's the visual acuity. We also have functional vision, which is how well somebody can use the vision that they do have. So you have 2 people with the exact same level that on the eye chart, but different uses of that and how much mileage they get out of the same vision. And that's part of what TVI, Teacher of the Visually Impaired, does. They do this functional vision assessment where they do a lot of tests with you about identifying different shapes and colors on different backgrounds to see what you can get. And actually, that has been really strong for me with the vision that I do have. And there has been some gain on the eye chart through the years, especially with my left eye. And I don't think there's anything structurally really about the eye that's changed that much. But I have developed kind of tools and I've been in new places. So I've been able to use the vision different ways and get kind of the most out of it.
So you obviously been very successful. Tell us a little bit, share a little bit about the challenges with regard to what you needed to be successful in school and securing that for you.
Well, there's advantages and disadvantages of being the first at doing something, which is what it was in my school for navigating through it with a visual impairment. There's a lot of challenge because there's not much of a playbook to go on of how to do X, Y, and Z. But the nice thing is you get to be able to say, I need a Braille material for this class, or I think having an accessible copy of a textbook online would be the best method.
So can I stop you there?
Sure.
So message to me is you had to learn how to advocate for yourself.
Yes, very much so. And that's something that my support team worked on with me really, really closely. I mean, I definitely agree with the sentiment of, you don't want to be in a situation where you say, I can't do X, because that doesn't help you and doesn't help anyone. You want to be able to say, yes, but here are the ways that we need to get that done. And I definitely didn't have all the answers for everything. I mean, no one can when you get into something because you don't know what you don't know and you need to experience it. But we kind of worked on, especially when I got to about middle school, late middle school, early high school, we talked about how I could speak up at the IEP meetings and help to design the goals that we were going to do for success in school and classes, and also for assistive technology and mobility. And I developed, and we have this and talked about this at the 2023 conference, both in school years and in college, of developing, a list of questions about what services do you as a school, what can you provide based on what I have going on my condition. And for me to be comfortable saying, I'm legally blind, I have Braille, I have accessible technology that I use to be successful. Can you tell me about your class and the type of activity that's involved so that I can tell you, here's what I need to do, here are the difficult points that are going to come up and the things that we're going to navigate? Because as someone coming through with a visual impairment, you're probably the first person that instructor has dealt with that condition. So you want to, the terminology we used was put them at ease with the situation, and for me to be able to get the help I needed. So we were very intentional about that, and I met with the teachers individually later on in high school, and to prepare for college where you're much more on your own and responsible for advocating yourself, where you don't have a vision instructor anymore. But it was because of working with such excellent instructors that I had the foundation and the skills to be able to do that, because they'd shown me how to do that. So that's why it's so important to have really good kind of personnel in place from an early age when you can't do these things. So when the time comes that you can do them, you're at the skill, needed to be successful in that kind of area.
So speaking of putting at ease, take us to that point where you had the conversation with your family about wanting to go to school in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, in Washington, I looked at a bunch of schools ranging from a mile from my house to, I think the furthest away, we were in Boston, visited Tufts. I think it was that was probably the farthest away from South Carolina. And I knew I wanted to study something around political science and international politics and history, and it's hard to find a better place to do that than Washington. And I had support from them, but I think the conventional path, I could have stayed in Columbia, where I'm from, and gone to South Carolina and had a great education and done really well. And it wouldn't be easy to say, oh, I'll just do this later. And technology certainly made it easier for me to make the decision that, yeah, I do want to go 3 states away from home to go to school. So I did. They missed me a lot. I'm sure they'll tell you that. And I think we're really worried about it. But I guess I did put them at ease because they were really happy with at the end of the day. I mean, the decision that I made, because it was the right one for me, and it's been successful and opened a lot of doors. And also, it's a lot more accessible of a city than where I'm from, although the area immediately near me is walkable. Where I went to school and where I live now, it opens a lot more options because you can just take the train anywhere you want to go. And that's something we don't have in South Carolina or in most of the country. And I wish that was accessible in more places because it really limits. I mean, if you need a job or any type of navigating on your own, I mean, your options are so limited in so much of the country. So I think it made a lot of sense in a lot of ways, although they were apprehensive at first.
I can imagine.
And said, "Are you sure?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I was sure. So
So you drove that decision.
there we go. I did drive the decision. Yep. I applied to 3 or 4 schools in Washington, so it was going to work out, but at a few of them, hopefully, and it did. And
So it was
here we are.
dorm life.
It was dorm life
4 years, and
for most of that in Washington. I think the requirement at GW is that you live on campus for 3 of them. I think the local residents of the west end of Washington want kids to live on campus because it's hectic enough. So it's more dorm life focused than I think most other schools. If you go to a state school, it might be you have to live on campus for a year or so. And so I did. Well, it was dorm life. Let me revise that a little bit because it was dorm life for precisely a year and a half, and then it was home life starting on March 13th, 2020. As y'all know. Yeah. So
audience groans.
yeah, that's the right reaction. There was a lot of that because it was complete chaos. And that's another kind of adapting kind of story to talk about because there were things that I still needed Braille copies of, even though I was now 3 states away from campus because I was taking economics at the time and a French class, and I needed the physical copies. So speaking to an excellent support system, my vision teacher from high school was still in town, Mary Robbins, and I reached out to her and said, "Hey, I'm actually back, and I need this exam Braille." Who's extremely busy with her students and trying to figure out what you do in the K-12 system because everyone was at home, and I had an embosser and just. I think one day it was a pickup. I think they came to pick up the embosser, which was outside the house because you couldn't see anybody at this point. It was all locked down. And also, it was a real trust leap of faith for the professors to be able to send her stuff. That wasn't guaranteed. But they took my suggestion because that was the solution to do that because there wasn't another solution. Because no one had done this COVID era before. And so got through. It was nice because I was only at home for the first few months of it. And then I came back to Washington in the fall of 2020 and lived off campus. And we had the disability support personnel come to campus from time to time to open up the office to just Braille some things. And then they would leave because everything was still very much shut down in fall of 2020. And then things started to gradually open in spring 2021, but we were still online. So we just kept the arrangement kind of going until we could have a normal life again. And by the time senior year happened. So that kind of lasted. There was no dorm life for 15 months or so, but I was still in DC and made the best of it, I would say.
So we have a couple minutes left. So you're about to embark on another transition. Why don't you share with the audience what you're doing to kind of set the stage for yourself in making a big move to London?
That's right. been speaking about jobs and what the next step for that is going to be, and I'm very interested in public service, and I've been working on the foreign service process for a while for the State Department. And while things are in limbo there, one thing I've had on my mind is doing a graduate program, and uh, thinking about I want it to be in defense and security, something like that. And there's a couple of options in DC, which are excellent, which is what I did for undergrad. I think it would be good. You could make a really strong argument for doing it in Washington for graduate school, but I've done my undergraduate there and I lived there for 7 years. So I also thought, where else can I get this done at a really strong institution where there'll be good networking and opportunities to find uh, work in the future? And so I had an eye on London because that's something I wanted to do during undergrad. Speaking of dorm life, I found 3 other roommates that were all going to study abroad in fall of 2020. So all 4 of us were going to have a dorm for 1 semester and then leave to go do that. And well, that didn't happen. And so London was on my list then. So let's revisit this now. And so applied to a couple schools. And I'd say that the graduate school process is a little more straightforward when we're applying, because it's undergrad. There's all these hoops you have to jump through, all these different essays, and you list all the clubs you were part of and all that. When you get to graduate school, they want to know, what were your grades and why do you want to go here? And then include some references. So it's more straightforward. So anyway, submitted that a few weeks ago, and then King's got back to me this week. And so I'm going to take them up on their offer. And now I get to have all these conversations again about disability support services and housing accommodations and planning out the next steps. And I've done it before and get to dust off the questions again. So it should be an interesting process, and should be really fun actually, and really great academically too, and lots of connections.
What a great trajectory. So thank you for sharing that with us. So for the folks in the audience, this is pretty much what a exam with Wallace is like. He comes up and we kind of catch up like this. This has been a little bit longer. We don't usually hold microphones, but it's a fairly typical visit with Wallace when he comes up for care. Wallace, thank you for your willingness to do this. You're never shy about taking on challenges. Very grateful, and looking forward to hearing about how things go for you in London.
Thanks.
Are we going to segue right away? Do we have time to take questions from the audience in case anybody has one? Yeah?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Matthew Trese again, beware, Wallace.
Those are tough questions.
Thank you. So, Wallace,
Yep.
it seems that one of the themes that I'm picking up on here is that not only are you not afraid of a challenge, but you're also embracing technology, which has helped make you successful. So I'm wondering if you have any tips for some of the parents or some of the doctors in the room who have a kid at home who maybe doesn't want to start their O&M training because they feel it makes them a little different, or they're apprehensive about, looking at vocational training so that they can work with computers and look for employment and things like that down the road. How did you ever have a time where you felt that way, 1, and 2, do you have any advice for the rest of us?
Yes, I would say so, because the orientation, mobility, and the adaptive technology, assistive technology does make you feel really different. And especially when you're in school, you don't want to be different. And there's a lot of pressure, especially in elementary and middle school years. And I would say the advice is probably do all of it. Absolutely do the orientation, mobility, and the assistive technology, because doing it doesn't obligate you to do it forever. You can choose what really works for you and get rid of what you think doesn't. But you'll never know if something works for you unless you try it. You could be missing out on something big if you don't try it. And it's there to benefit you, even if it's not fun at the time. So I would just say do it because it could help you. And then you get to decide, what to keep and what to move away from, because everyone is different, and there'll be things that help or don't.
We could probably take one other question if there are any more in the audience before we move on.
Wallace, my name's Alex Dobin. We met last night. First and foremost, I've got to say you are an inspiration, and you're somebody who, you have really taken the bull by the horns with your life. And so we've heard about kind of growing up. We've heard a little bit about education and professionally, but what's on my mind the most is what do you like to do for fun? And how do you do that with, friends groups and those that are around you?
Let's see. I like lots of we've got these nice trails in the National Mall in Washington, D.C. and Arlington, and they're accessible because they're paved and near the metro stations, and so I can get out and do lots of walking, and I listen to podcasts or books as I do that, and it kind of makes the time fly by. And then wherever my friends are, I can see them because a lot of them live in the same neighborhood that I do. And even if they didn't, I can just get on the train and go see them. So that makes kind of life easier to get to and time to spend with other people. And I like traveling anytime I get the chance to do that. So I was excited. This was another trip to Detroit and to see everybody. So that's always at the top of my list. Let's try to get to as many states as I can. And then, so I just think living in a place where things are accessible and easy to get to is key. And then that's meeting friends. GW is a very big school, and I didn't know folks there coming into it. And it took a while, I think, to get to the group of folks that I spend a lot of time with now, because that's something that's really hard, right? If you walk into a classroom and you can see well, you can sit by the person you want to. If you can't, in my case, you have to kind of figure that out. And it turns out that a lot of people just sit in the same seats every day. So, because kind of they're never assigned, but once it's yours, and it's, oh, somebody took my seat. It's a big deal. So that's a way to do it. I think doing a few clubs, that's really key because it gets you into a smaller group of people, and that can help you kind of get connections, which is what I did in high school and a little bit of college, probably less so in college, but because that helps with the hobbies and interests. Like I did mock trial in high school, which I really, really liked, and Model UN and things like that, and made friends that in high school. And then college, I met 2 or 3 friends, and then got to meet their friends, and that that was really key. You meet a few, and then you meet their friends. It's a good network to have. And also, I think too, looking back on it, GW has a smaller campus, it's in Washington, but it's not right downtown, called the Mount Vernon campus. And a lot of people who are friends of mine now met through that. They have much smaller dorm buildings, and it's much more, it looks like a traditional, like small liberal arts college in America. That's probably a good environment because you're in a smaller group of people, and it's easier to run into the same people again and again.
Thanks again, Wallace. We're going to go on to the panel discussions. Thanks all.
Thanks.
Well done.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
What would you like? Who's at the next panel now?
Follow me and we'll walk through
Is
that.
he on the next panel?
Yes.
Oh,
You are
we're
just
gonna go
like
to
to hang
the
out.
table behind you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Oops.
Hope I'm sorry. No, you're good. No, you're fine. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So there's one more chair right next to you.
Okay, this one.
Yep, that's yours. Got your name on it.
It's nice. It's low on battery. So
Thank you.
All right. So welcome everybody to our first panel discussion. My name's Nicole. I'm on the board for PRRF. Louisa says if I moderate two more things, I can actually change my title to the official moderator for PRRF. So like that's the goal. On our first panel today, we have the esteemed Wallace Stuckey, and we have Alba and Alex Dobbins. You're good. The Dobins are joining us from South Florida and are parents of two amazing children, Mia, who's 8, and Oliver, who's 5, soon to be 5. And they began their journey with PRRF about 3.5 years ago when their daughter Mia was diagnosed with fever. Alba is a doctor of pharmacy at Healthcare District of Palm Beach County, and she's active with the foundation and focuses on building personal connections with other families to help build a support system, as many of them have a unique journey with pediatric retinal diseases. And Alex, also on the PRRF board, is a senior HR leader for the nation's leading renewable energy provider, Next Era Energy, and focuses his support on the overall operations of the foundation with a key focus on fundraising. So with that, how about we jump into the panel discussion? So up for grabs, whoever wants to buzz in first. How about navigate? Oh,
there's no buzzer.
no, the figurative buzzer. So navigating IEPs as children enter middle school and high school. Can you speak to this and the larger network that we raise awareness to as far as IEPs go in education?
Yeah, I think I can kick off a little bit. So we have we've been in a sense lucky, right? We have not had to navigate that as much at this point in time, but have done working with PRRF and knowing a number of families that have had to navigate that. It's really, one of the biggest things that we've learned and heard through others is really the connection with the school and connection with those around you. The PRRF and other organizations and just locally within the school districts, whether public or private, right? Being able to make some connections within the district, understanding that there are special counselors, there are individuals who do this work full time. Really just navigating through that perspective is key. But one of the biggest things that we've heard about and have learned is nobody's going to advocate for yourself as good as you are. And so making sure that, as a family unit, as I would call it, work together, work closely together on that. And I think, Wallace said it before, which really hit home for me, which was, that individual who is, vision impaired, hearing impaired, whatever impairment is, they have to have a seat at that table and they have to be able to speak to what some of the key things that they need are, what some of the key things that they either think they need or would like to have. In the day and age that we live in today, I don't know that there's a whole ton of things that's impossible, right? From a technology perspective. And so making sure that you're leveraging every tool that's out there, every level of technology, and really doing your research, I think is your starting point of, how successful you can be.
I was going to say one of the things that we've always done is Mia's in 2nd grade now, and she was diagnosed at the later part of VPK, so pre-kindergarten. And one of the first things we had to do is, or we always do, is when we meet the new teacher, we pull her aside and we say, hey, Mia has fever. It's a rare, genetic eye condition. This is where we're at. This is what we need to look out for. We look out for it every day at home. Please look out for us here. And at first they're like, oh, what is that? Is that why she wears glasses? Fever, they think, oh, does she have a fever? Like a temperature. Usually we print out information for them so they have it. And we're constantly throughout the year, hey, any vision issues? Do you notice any difference if she's sitting certain places? Does she ever complain she can't see things, especially before doctor's visits? They're usually pretty good with us and working with us, but I agree with Alex. We have to be able to let them know so they can be a partner with us.
Can I put you on the spot, Wallace?
Yeah.
And ask. So Wallace,
Yep.
tell us, as far as IEPs went for you, when did you get involved in participating in the planning for IEPs and the discussions, and what advice do you have for parents?
We definitely had them all the way through, and I attended, I think pretty much all of them. I mean, all the way from, they come to mind from kind of early middle school. I definitely had more planning in the meeting and kind of workshopping the goals in advance of what we were going to do in high school. And having to being able to shape those and say, okay, this is this is my meeting, it's about me. So here's what I'm going to talk about, be able to say, okay, here's what was going on in my classes in the past year. Uh, here's what's going to be coming up, the projects coming up. So really high school is where I had the most impact on it. But I would say advice, I think having the whole support group that your child works with in the meeting is really important. So at mine, we had of course, my vision teacher had a big role in helping to lead it. Um, my family was there. But we also had the principal at mine. We had the homeroom teacher or advisor. They called it as you got to high school. They were present, and the mobility instructor, the assistive technology person I was working with, who kind of brief, okay, here's what we've been doing the past year, and chip in, and also be able to hear everything going on with you. Even if they just work with you in mobility, it would be good for them to hear what you're looking at academically right now. So I would have the whole team, anyone that you work with or your child works with, to attend each year so that everyone's on the same page and agrees about where you're going.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question was specific to fever, but I think can be extrapolated to any disorder that causes vision disturbance. Do you guys have any tips or tricks for navigating like the day-to-day life, or some challenges are thrown to you with low vision?
The challenges, I think some of the challenges are uh, some really simple things for most people. Like this is a big challenge. I was at the airport yesterday looking for the Uber pickup zone, which is in a really tough to find place in the middle of a parking garage. It's not signed well. There's no real accessible way of how to get there. And I got to it by just talking to somebody at one of the check-in counters who put me in touch with somebody from the airport itself who walked with me to the location. But I'm trying to think how else I could have done that. I mean, I use a service called Ira, which is really useful. They're live agents who are trained to navigate folks with visual conditions through any type of environment. But there's times where the technology doesn't go as far as you need to, and this was a great example of where this is something super hard to find, and you just have to. I guess the answer is just reach out for help for it. But even think like last night, for example, turning off all the hotel room lights. Every lamp in this country has like a different switch of on it where it should it be, and if you could see it, it's super easy. But if you can't, you're gonna feel all over it. Is it like at the top of the lamp? Is it the base of it? Is it one of those switches like on the wire somewhere? And that's really hard. So, I mean, there's big challenges like, navigating something like street crossings. Of course, you can do with the mobility lessons, which is very good. And because I did those for so many years, that's something I have a high degree of confidence in. But finding the door, let's say, of the business you're going to, I can use Google Maps to find the location, but it will say arrived when you're in the parking lot. And then you have to figure it, or indoor, in a large indoor setting. That's where it can be very tricky. Because again, you can call a service like Ira. Be My Eyes is another one, although they can be good in some circumstances. They're less trained, I think, than Ira is. So there's some limitations there. But when there's no map or something, they can only see what's in your camera, and it's not really what you need. So I guess just reaching out to folks when you're in a difficult situation, because there's some things like that I don't really have the answers to yet.
Any tips and tricks that you guys have found so far?
I'd say Mia's a little bit younger, so I don't know what challenges we will have in the future. That's one of the hardest things for us because we know fever is so unpredictable. But so far, she does wear glasses. Thankfully she has good vision. But even like having her wear her glasses lately, she's like, oh, my friends don't wear glasses. And now some of them have started to wear glasses in her class. So she's like, oh, I'm not the only one, you know? But even like the patching, we were always very encouraging, you know, to the point where we would even try to put a patch on ourselves, you know, to show her that it was okay. We did patch for about 2 years. Um, I say just explaining to them. I know they're so little and sometimes it's hard to understand for them, but we always try to give her a reason why. And, you know, the doctor's very encouraging as far as the doctor she sees. Mia, let's patch. Mia, let's wear our glasses daily. Um, I'm sure those challenges will get harder as we move on, you know, hopefully not, but maybe. And then it's just at this stage, I think it's just explaining to her and with the amount of information that she can understand.
One thing that we did early on is have the visual skills be a make it academic and make it a lesson for the class. So we did Braille alphabets for a bit on the desks, which people thought were really neat, and what was superimposed, it was the stickers on top of the print letters. So people, I don't know, you know, they didn't need to learn them, but at least they could see, okay, here's the dots version of the same letter. We did the Braille Christmas trees we did in first grade. Those were a huge hit. People told me about them years later. We just did a made it in Braille, did the symbols in the shape of like a Christmas tree so they could feel this is what a tactile thing feels like. Or even like a blow up globe. We had that in the classroom so the other students could see it. There's a visual something, so even if you're not using Braille, it's just magnified. It's also tactile, but they could, you know, it's a tangible example for them. And also, if you have a visual impairment, it means that you're not, other people are seeing the same thing that you are. So it makes you feel, I think, better that, you know, it's not just you. Obviously, it's just you needing it for content, but they get to see it too and think, oh, that's really neat.
That's awesome. All right, we have a question that came in from when people registered, and someone's son who's 12 years old has Stargardt's, and he's in the band, and reading music has become harder. Do you guys happen to know of any technology that can assist either magnifying the music sheets or getting it onto a screen?
I don't, but I could say that, you know, with the technologies that are coming out today, right? I mean, specifically, and I would imagine there is a technology out there, and maybe that's something that we can get back to this individual with, but just the leveraging ability of ChatGPT and some of the technologies that are out there, right? I have to imagine that there's something that is, you know, fairly simple to access and fairly simple to use at this stage, but nothing that comes to mind.
Right.
Be tricky because you would have to, it has to be magnified, of course, but when you magnify something, your field is lower because it takes up more space. So it would need to be something like on screen that moves with whatever you're doing. I did chorus in middle school, so it was something where I could kind of just listen and pick it up. I didn't do band, but I mean, band is awesome. So, you know, definitely keep it up. And I don't have the answer right now either, but I'm sure there's going to be something out there.
You just said something that made me think, and totally maybe works, maybe doesn't, but there's also apps like teleprompter apps and things that will move to that time frame. And so if there's a second count that goes along with the music, which I believe that there would be, you know, I'd imagine there's a technology that could be leveraged or worked on together.
Awesome. Okay, so we're coming to the end of panel 1, which was focusing on physical challenges, assistive technology, everyday tasks, IEPs, and advocacy. In closing, each of you, I would love to hear from you. What is the one thing that either you wish you knew from the get-go or you wish everybody else knew? Broad strokes.
Wallace, you want to start?
Big question. Well, I think you would love to have had the tools that I have now, you know, from day one, because it's nice to have everything, and it makes I think when you're having things put into an accessible format, whether it's large print or braille or with technology, you do struggle because, right, that has to be done separately, and you are reliant on you know, folks in your life getting it to somebody who can do that for you, or getting it to you so you can do it yourself. But before everyone else gets it, and that just takes time, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get it on time. And if you don't, you're going to be behind in an academic setting or a social setting. So I don't know if it answers the question, but just strategies for knowing what's to come so you can get things done that you need, and not having to be, behind and having the special process done, meaning that you're not caught up in whether it's school or uh, sports or games or any kind of activity. It kind of comes into play, and that's something that should always be worked on.
Okay, one thing I wish I would have known from the beginning, because I will never forget, it was COVID when Mia got diagnosed, and Alex couldn't come with me to the eye visit, so it was just me and Mia. And the doctor walks in after doing a bunch of scans with about 5 other doctors, and she said, I called Alex, and she said, okay, your daughter has fever. It's lifelong, it can range in severity from mild to blindness. I wish somebody would have told me at that moment that it was going to be okay, you know, because the whole way home, we just cried, had no idea who to go to, what to do, where do we even start? We couldn't even call our family because we didn't even know where to start. So I wish since the beginning, I would have known that it was going to be okay, that no matter where this path takes us, good, bad, in between, we are going to do it together and it's going to be okay. Since then we have learned that there's a lot of support groups, we have great doctors that we are so blessed and thankful. We have you guys who have been a great blessing to us. But as parents, when you get a diagnosis like that, when neither of us have that, it's just it seems like the end of the world. And then now, 4 years into it, I know that it's not the end of the world, that it will be okay. And we're taking, every step that we can take to get her to be okay.
Yeah, I think on that same note, right? Day one would have been great for somebody to share 4 letters with us, which was PRRF, and we could have had, a resource. I think that's, step one. I think step two is the parenting handbook that you need when you go through things like this, no matter if it's this challenge or any challenge. And so having that, handbook that still doesn't exist to this day is something that I wish was out there. But then I think, the biggest thing for me when I walk away from it is somebody putting a little bug in my ear to say, it's not a disability, it's an ability to do anything you want. It's what you put your mind to, and it's how you overcome the challenges that are in front of you, right? And I think each one of us, no matter if you are low vision, no vision, low hearing, no hearing, or you may look as though a perfect able-bodied human, but everybody has their inabilities in life. And I think being able to take that message and realize that that inability is just an ability that allows you to think differently, to challenge yourself and to challenge those around you is a message that would have been great on that afternoon when, I was sitting in the parking lot in a 6-story parking garage while they were in with the doctor, and I was on FaceTime, and I just see a team of, 6 or 7 doctors in the room and listening to the phone conversation. So I think, the biggest message and walk away for me is, and it's a note that I took this morning, which is it's not a disability, it's an ability to do whatever you want and what you put your mind to. And I think, for people with any type of vision issue, but just people in general, we need to think more like that in this world, because there's always an ability to do more and do different.
Awesome. So I want to thank our panel members, and we will move on, switch out panel members and move
Yep.
on to panel
Give
number.
me just, before we close, I just want to share in the chat. We have Jordan who said 100% agreed with you, Alba. It felt like our world was ending when we were diagnosed. Wish we could have known how okay we would be. So some feedback from online. And also the question on the sheet music, I think, can Elizabeth speak to that?
That's a very good question. I don't really have many with needing to magnify music specifically, as I could just listen and follow along. My twin brother and I are both blind with ROP, and we were both musicians, and we were in ensembles, and we just listened and learned Braille music as well. So I don't really have something directly that might help them, but I would still encourage anything you can do to stay in that if you are really enjoying it.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Oh, please.
I am under the National Library Services for the Blind and Print Disabled, which is under the Library of Congress umbrella, and they do provide free music in Braille. So if you call, I can provide you with that number. So you just call the number and they tell them what music sheet that you need, and they can Braille it for you and send it to your home.
I use NLS a lot in school, and it was great. And even I reached out to them. I needed an accessible copy of a book for research. That's how 2 years ago, and I hadn't needed to use NLS in, you know, 15, 16 years because it's mostly elementary school that I use them for. And they got it done. So they're great. NLS is great.
If I could just add also, a couple of the young people that Elizabeth and Michael grew up with were in the marching band. So they figured it out, and we can consult with them. And if we're able to find out exactly how they managed to do that, then we can pass that on.
Thank you. Sorry, Nicole.
I still get my moderator certificate, right?
This is 1 out of 2. You get it by the end of the day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Head out this way.
Yeah.
Best way.
Great job. Thank you.
Sure.
I like this.
While they're getting situated, let me share another feedback that we have from online from Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. You should have been here. This is Brandon Warner. For those of you here that know Brandon, this is a bit of an off the wall idea, but I know some folks who don't have use of their hands that use a pointer attached to a hat. I wonder if it would be possible to scroll with a pointer attached to your head so that you don't have to take your hands off your instrument. Only Brandon.
Brandon was who I was thinking of.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you, Brandon.
All right, we're on to panel number 2. And this panel has a focus on mental challenges, mental health for families and patients, and having the confidence to advocate for yourself, building friendships while still being independent. And on our panel, we have the esteemed Dr. Matthew Trese, who you guys met earlier, who is also on the board for PRRF. And we're also joined by Dr. Marianne Dunn, who is the mother of Elizabeth and Michael. And she's a clinical psychologist in Grand Rapids and a former special educator. And also Elizabeth Dunn, she is 29 years old from Grand Rapids, and she and her twin brother are both blind. And she was treated in the NICU by the dynamic duo of Dr. Patrick Droste and Dr. Michael Trese. Welcome. All right, so we have a couple questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then I'll let you guys kind of add some context to the topics as you see fit. How do you manage recurrent grief as a parent or child with a disability?
Well, I can field that one because it was my question. I obviously wanted to get to it. As another mom mentioned, grief is a very big part of what we go through. And one of the things that I did was put on my psychology hat and start researching what they have called chronic grief or chronic sorrow. I prefer recurrent grief. I think it's just very important to point out that there's that initial grief. And unlike grief with a death, where the goal basically is acceptance, there's certainly acceptance, but also the realization that through the lifestyle, every milestone that other kids are mastering, my kids were not. And that activates the grief again. And at first, I had misgivings about it, thinking, what's wrong with me? Does this mean I'm not accepting them? What's the problem that I can't, move on and not feel this sadness again? And then when I did the research, it was very, very helpful to just recognize how much sense that makes, when Elizabeth and Michael's peers were getting their driver's license. My kids were not, and all those other things that happen along the way. So the other piece that I thought was very helpful is the research suggests that you anticipate you're going to have this happen, and when it does, they recommend that you create a personal resilience resource list, which can include things like prayer, contacting a friend, making sure that you're in touch with your support group, someone else maybe who has a child with a visual impairment who's a few years older, calling them and saying, we're going through this, what was it like for you? But all of the things that help you reach a point of resilience, because this is going to be ongoing. And the goal is to just find ways to make sure you keep your energy up, that you feel supported and connected, and not to misinterpret these additional incidents of grief as somehow not part of the picture. It's very much part of the picture. So normalizing that for others is a very important thing to do.
If I may add onto that too, it's that experience of grief is not unique just to the family members who are not watching their child hit the milestone, but it's not infrequent that these lifelong diseases have plateaus and then there's sort of a valley again. And so people go through grief at multiple stages throughout the course of their disease because their vision has changed. Things have gotten worse. And I think that can kick up a lot of feelings of grief.
Yeah.
The term you use, recurrent grief.
Mm-hmm.
In the medical community, we oftentimes think of chronic diseases as having sort of an acute on chronic exacerbation. And I think there's the same thing for vision loss and experiencing grief again.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that as a blind child growing up, I would say that I didn't really feel grief. I felt that I was very much accepted and that my sighted friends accepted who I was, and I just thought it was a normal part of life to learn Braille or to get a cane. There was a point when Mom told me that I was blind, and I thought that it was just normal. Like, I didn't think that I was any different. And it also helped that we connected with other people, other families, and blind children who were going through the same things as I was. And so we could learn from each other and just find that sense of community, which I think was really important. And interacting with all of those individuals helped me to learn about self-advocacy and even simple things like tips with accessible technology and things like that. So I think having a sense of community and belonging is really helpful, especially if your blind child feels isolated in any way.
Thank you. All right, our other question is, studying at a university for visually impaired youth, how do you prepare in advance for this kind of challenge from a student and a parent standpoint? And how ambitious should you be?
Do you want to start, Elizabeth?
Yes. I would say that when I was in college, I had the tools that I learned in high school from other blind individuals and from my TVI about self-advocacy and just making sure that I had everything and that I had the right personal connections and physical and technological accommodations, and also things like orientation mobility to go around the campus. And I do remember some of those things even going through our state agency, sending requests like, this is why I need this technology. And I felt really empowered that I was doing all of that and advocating for myself, because I not only felt like it was helping me advance my life, but it was also, I feel like in many stages of my life, teaching people about what I need and how I do things is a mutual learning opportunity. And I really love that aspect of it, because I'm not only learning from others, but they are learning about how I do things. And I just love telling people about that. So I would just encourage that.
I'm trying to think from a parent perspective. You know, we were prepared. We had great support in our school system. Ultimately, it took about a year and a half until they were able to acknowledge, we don't know how to do this with a blind student. And so that was when I could really come in and help them realize, I'm here to help you learn. We're going through this together. And it all worked out well. They ultimately did get someone on board who was just an excellent TVI. So I think the kids were very well prepared, knowing that, you know, the federal rules no longer apply. Colleges do not have to provide these things like K through 12 does. But they were ready to advocate, and thankfully we found that the disability person they went to the same college, was just a tremendous help. Remember Nate?
Yeah.
Yeah, just
Nate.
really, really supportive and helpful. And I think people who go into that kind of work, that's what they want to do. They want to be as helpful as they can. So that's how we prepare.
We have another online question. This is from Jordan. Almost 2 years into our diagnosis of fever, and I will still cry when I talk to people about my son's disease and their lack of vision. Will that ever go away? No.
Well, I think clearly she's addressing recurrent grief. And one of the things that in the field of psychology, trauma is defined as experiencing an event that you had no preparation for, that you never had knowledge about prior, that changes your life forever, that results in you feeling isolated and alone. And when you think about a parent hearing such diagnosis, those are all present. The one we can do something about is what everyone has referenced here is so important. You don't have to feel isolated, seeking out community so that you feel understood, so that you have people to call when you're going through that recurrent grief. And they're just there to hold space for it with you, as you will do for them when they need you. But community and feeling affirmed, feeling supported. I recall last night, Cindy's husband was here, and we were very lucky. As our kids were growing up, we had a whole Michigan network. And what we all loved was, as parents, we'd come to these weekend events that we would put on. And I'd bring what I'd learned, and then 8 other parents would bring what they learned. And we all walked home or rode home with so much more knowledge than we came with. So can't emphasize enough the importance of community and having that kind of support.
If I could go back to the how ambitious should you be at the university level or any level? I think that I'm extremely lucky because I have been able to take over the care of some of my father's patients. And so not only do I get to see new children, new babies that are affected with diseases, but I also get to see what it's like, 30 years later when I meet somebody like Jessica, or, a little later than that when I meet someone like Sharon. And I know that you can be very, very successful. I have a quick story I would like to tell about someone who I think the answer to the question about how ambitious you should be is that the sky's the limit. One of my patients actually lives in Germany, and she has severely affected vision loss in one eye, and then her other eye is seeing quite well. And she ended up getting into medical school straight out of she's in medical school, and she's in a class learning about genetics, and they started talking about fever. And they said, this is a disease that no one ever sees, but it's called ROP in a full-term baby, which is how people used to think about it. And she went up to the instructor afterwards and said, I have ROP, and I was full-term, and it never made any sense. And so in the European medical system, there's like one attending, right? And then there are a bunch of doctors underneath them, and getting up to the attending can sometimes be a challenge. But she wouldn't take no for an answer. And so she finally made it up to the attending, and the attending told her that he had never seen it before, and that's not what she had. So she ended up finding someone on Facebook who had put their mutation out there, and it matched her mutation, and she came over to visit. And she was subsequently diagnosed with fever, introduced to that family. And I really like that story for a lot of reasons. One, she was in medical school. That's pretty darn impressive. I don't think there should be any limitations for anybody. Two, she didn't quit. She kept going despite being told no over and over again. And then 3, she found a community with which she could communicate with and find support. So sky's the limit.
In the constraints of our panel topics, is there anything from the physician standpoint that you wish was either more well-known or that you really put an emphasis on when you see patients?
So I think there's 2 ways to think of, well, there's more than 2 ways, but the way that I think about that is one of the things that I hate hearing is when people come and they come to see me and they say, I was told there's nothing more that can be done. I just don't believe in that approach. I think that there might be there might not be something that can be done today, but we really don't know what the future holds. And so I think it's really important to think about, to really be a master of your craft, to understand the diseases, know how to approach them, and think about ways to impact the direction of that disease so that potentially there's regenerative therapy in the future. And so that is kind of like dealing with the disease right in the moment, and it's also looking down the road. But as we all know, research takes time. And so I think a very important third pedestal to that thought process is thinking about what to do now and how to get you living your life now and achieving your goals now and being independent. And I think there was a very interesting study out of Johns Hopkins that looked at individuals with vision loss. And for a long time, there's been this dogma that says that if you have severe vision loss or blindness, that your rate of depression is significantly higher, which is true. But if you look at the individuals who had blindness and you break it down, what they found was the individuals who were more depressed were the ones who did not have independence. And it was actually the reliance on others that caused people to feel isolated, depressed, alone. And those are things that we all really need to work on. And as individuals working in this space, it is our responsibility to try to help people achieve independence through things like which have been brought up many times: orientation, mobility, vocational rehabilitation, et cetera. So I think that that would be a good thing for us as the medical community to work on.
I like it. Any other thoughts from Elizabeth or Dr. Dunn?
Yes, I stated that there's that sense of community and belonging and getting help from others. I am proud to say that I am still helping others with that, not only in my community with the people that I grew up with, but I'm also assisting in facilitating support groups at the Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired in Grand Rapids. And with that, it's either younger adults like myself or older adults who have recently lost their vision. And initially, the perspective is pretty different from someone who's been blind since birth versus someone who's just lost their vision but who's been living with it for so long. But I am able to share my experience and just little tips of how to do things, no matter how simple, whether it's labeling and organizing things or doing something on a smartphone, things like that. And it not only, going back to what I was saying about mutual learning opportunities, I not only feel that I've made a positive difference in someone's life, but I've gotten a lot of feedback from people who've attended these support groups, and they say that it's made a positive difference on their lives as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Anything from the audience online?
We're a promotion of our library. Yeah. I represent Macomb Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. We serve Macomb County residents.
People online, I want to know what's up.
Okay, again, my name is Barb. I'm an outreach librarian for the Macomb Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. And we are under the National Library Services for the Blind and Print Disabled in the Library of Congress in DC. So I represent Macomb County, which is next door to Oakland County. And we serve all ages, people, individuals with blindness, visually impaired, reading disability like dyslexia, and physical disability where they're not able to hold a book anymore. And so we provide free, accessible library materials like audiobooks, large print books, braille books, directly to our patrons' homes for free. And so every state has a library for the blind. And so I can give you information if you are outside of Michigan or living in a different county other than Macomb County. And it's a great resource. It allows our patrons to continue their love of reading. And so by providing it reading materials in accessible format, we will help them support, their love of reading, for forever. So, and we also provide adaptive technology. We loan out iPads, we loan out smart speakers, anything that will help our patrons to live independently, to be able to stay connected with family and friends. So we do more than just books. We do technology as well. And we also do reading programs by phone. So our patrons can participate in reading discussions on a monthly basis. And so we try to do as much programs, provide as much resources and services so we can provide the love of reading or continue to support that for our patrons with disabilities. So thank you.
Dr. Capone closes. Hang on one second. I'd like to introduce to the group Dr. Minton. Dr. Minton is going to give us a tour of the lab shortly. Dr. Minton, any few words? I see you have some handouts.
No, just if you want to come and see the lab environment where we work on Dodge Hall on the 4th floor. I'm here. I know one of our students, Savio, who's just graduating from Oakland University, is with us too, and he's worked with me for a couple of years on some of the DNA sequencing we do of ARC patients, and it's the space where we try to train some of the medical students who hook up with us and teach them about human genetics, you know, sort of what I call practical applied human genetics, because in medical school is a very busy time with a lot to learn. And if a med student wants to learn a little bit more about genetics, they kind of have to focus on that extra effort themselves. And so they have an opportunity to do that with us. And I think a lot of students that go to Oakland in our summer research program and who come into the labs just part of their degree learning, some of those have been influenced over the years to become ophthalmologists. And you'll see names like Dan St. Albin and Narain Putras. These are ophthalmologists now that were once just undergraduate students here at Oakland University really about a decade ago. So if you want to come and see where we do some of that stuff, the basic science, I'm happy to show you around and answer any questions if I can. And I like coming to this today because it's a tough year for academia and science, as many of you may know, and it's hard to be positive about things except to come to positive things like this. So I find you are inspiring me and my people to keep doing what we do for the greater good, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Minton. Yeah. Before you close, it's been kind of quiet. So I want to share with you what our young people have been working on all afternoon. They'd like to share. Can we have the kids come in? Let's go to the front and show everybody what you've been working on today. Show it off. And show them your bracelet, your artwork right here. Here we go. And what is, come on.
Contest.
Go ahead. What is your name?
David.
David. David, can you show everybody what you worked on? Ah, and what is that?
It's Roblox in Minecraft.
Nice. And your name?
Andrew.
Andrew, what did you work on? What is that?
It's an octopus.
Oh, an octopus. Go Red Wings. And your name?
Oliver.
Oliver. And what did you, wow, what did you draw?
Baby shark.
Ah,
And octopus. And fishes.
beautiful. And your name?
Mia.
Again?
Mia.
Ah, Mia, what did you make?
Me and Gianna.
Oh, Gianna, did you cheat?
We did a contest and we only are allowed to pick 3 colors to make a sunflower. And this is mine,
Oh. So silly. And show them your bags that you drew and you put glitter on. Hi. Nice. Thank you. Thank you, Anna and Gianna. Good job. Okay, glitter. Yeah, okay, and glue.
It's entirely appropriate that Louise is covered with glitter, by the way. Thanks, guys. And gals. Hard act to follow. So to close today, folks, as you know, I would hope and expect everybody in the audience knows the mission of the foundation, first and foremost, is to drive awareness of pediatric retinal diseases, and also to drive research into those diseases, but importantly also to catalyze community. And that's really what today was all about. So Stephanie did me the favor of making sure that she had a list up here so that I don't forget anybody. But, you know, I really do want to thank first and foremost all of you who are here today. With a special thanks to Louisa for being the tip of the spear on bringing all this event together and all of us here, to Stephanie and Heather, to our board members who've come to support us as well as, and in particular to all of you who have joined us today. So thank you, and we look forward to next year's event as well. And Ken, are we following you to the lab?
Walk across the grassy quad there. You have a coat on. Like the one day in the middle of these 2 weeks, it's still.
Yep. Yep. After our 84-degree day a couple of days ago. All right. Thank you again, folks. Enjoy the tour for those of you who go on it. Bye-bye.